So here we're going to do a 3 needle bind off on the shoulders of this cardigan. I just finished working this section, so it's already on the needle. So this section I need to pick up the stitches that I put on hold and put them back on the needle. Before we do that, to make sure it's correct, I have a marker here showing me that this is the right side of my work. When we work the bind off, we want the right sides to be facing each other. So we will face them together like this. These will be the wrong sides facing out, which of course on this fabric isn't so obvious. So this needle is correct. So when I pick up the stitches on this side, I will also want the needle to be pointing in the same direction, this way. Okay, so now I've done that and I have both sets of stitches on my needles here. It's a good idea at this point to double check that you have the same number of stitches on either needle, as we're going to be working them parallel. I still have the working yarn attached here. If you don't have your working yarn attached or a tail, you can just join it here now at the end. And you need, as the name of this bind off would suggest, a 3rd needle. So I have one here. It doesn't have to be the same size, it should just be fairly close. Okay, so now we're ready to bind off. Always inserting your 3rd needle knitwise into the stitches. First go into the stitch on your front needle, the first stitch, then the first stitch on your back needle, and then take your working yarn, wrap it around, normally as if to knit, pulling it through the stitch first on your back needle, and then the stitch on your front needle, and then pulling carefully both stitches off. So there, we've worked our first stitch. Let's do that again. Again, knitwise into the stitch on the first needle, knitwise into the first stitch on the second needle, wrap the yarn through the first stitch on the back needle and through the first stitch on the front needle, and off. Now that we have 2 stitches on our 3rd needle, we're going to bind off this last stitch that we just worked, just as you would with a normal bind off. So taking either needle, I find it most comfortable to work with the back needle. Take the second stitch on your 3rd needle and pull it over that stitch. So now we have 1 stitch completely bound off, so now we can continue. Binding off 1 stitch on each needle, or knitting them together rather, and off. And then again, we have 2, so we already need to go bind this stitch off. I'll show you that a couple more times. Into the first stitches on both needles, pull through and off, bind off a stitch on your 3rd needle. So we will just continue in this way until all of our stitches are bound off. Just working the last stitch here. Okay, so now we've worked all the stitches on our main working needle. We're gonna again bind off, and then we just have this 1 stitch left. So you can go ahead and, whoops, make sure it stays. Stays on. You can go ahead and break your working yarn, leaving enough of a tail for you to weave in later. And then take the end of your yarn and put it through that last loop. So as you can see here, we have a ridge where we bound off, but on the other side, the right side of your work, it looks a lot nicer and neater there. So that is the 3 needle bind off. I am of course going to do this now on the other shoulder of this sweater, but as you can see, it creates a really nice seam here. So I hope you found that helpful, and be sure to check out my other tutorials and the pattern for this pattern linked below in the description.